A number of years ago in a congregation I was in, a fellow came up and out of curiosity was struggling. He said, what is it that you and we as a congregation, as a church, actually believe in? It seems things have changed and I'm confused. It all used to be so certain. The Bible was the Bible and what it said we believed, and Jesus was Jesus, and it was about getting into heaven when we died, and we knew who was in and who was out and what was right and what was wrong, and it doesn't seem like that anymore. What is it we're on about? I said, we talked a bit. I said, look, leave it with me and I'll come back to you and we'll have a proper conversation. Which we did. But also knowing that there were others who were asking similar questions, struggling with similar issues. I put some stuff down on paper. But what I wanted was, what was the simple solution that would be deep, or the simple response that would be deeper and profounder? And I came up with 3 words. God is love. Basically I said, the whole Christian story, the whole essence of what we believe about faith and what the church should be on about is God is love. Not some Mills and Boon, rom-com, sentimental pop song kind of love. But love that is rich and full and deep, that gives of self, that is confronting and challenging and inspiring, and lifts us into the place where we can be most truly who we're created to be. I think I said something to the effect that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and the only power that can transform the world and overcome the problems and the divisions and the barriers and all the things in our world that cause us pain and struggle. And God is in the midst of that because God is love. And so many of the readings in the Easter season are about God's love, and God is love. And this week in John's story of Jesus, in chapter 15, Jesus says to his disciples to follow his commandments. He says, I have loved you and I share the Father's love with you, and I ask you to obey my commandments. And he gives them the commandment. And I'm waiting for, the 10 commandments, or do this, do that. When growing up, it was about you've got to do this, you've got to think this, you've got to... And Jesus simply says, this new commandment I give you is all I want. Love one another in the same way that I've loved you. And he says that no greater love has anyone than to lay down their life for their friend. And he says, I call you my friends. You're not slaves or servants, or you're my friends, brothers, sisters. We're family, we're together, we're one. And it's not just that group of 12 or people who go to church and say the right things. Love one another is a command for the whole world. Love one another in the same way that I have loved. And I lay down my life for my friends. I give myself for the sake of the world. To show you and to celebrate and inspire you in the joy that is in God. I give myself in love because God has loved me, and I want that love of God and me for you, and the joy that comes with it. Because when we love one another, it is joyful. When we give and receive love, there is joy and peace and connection. I was listening to ABC Radio just in the car the other day, and Richard Glover was interviewing Hugh Mackay, and I missed most of it, but I caught a couple of snippets. And he was talking about competition, and he said, whilst competition can sometimes bring out the best in us, cooperation is far better. The only thing that's going to change this world and bring us back to where we need to be is cooperation, working together, bringing out the best in each other. And I think that's what Jesus is on about. Love, love, love. Giving of self for another. Looking into the face of another and seeing the face of the holy, of the divine, of God. Giving of self. I mean, so many of the stories that we celebrate, whether it's in Anzac Day or post-floods or post-bushfires or crises and emergencies, honouring those who have given of themselves. People who sacrifice life for another, often without any thought. There's a story I still remember from many, many years ago. I was in my early 20s, and we used to take youth groups down to a campsite down southwest Sydney, modelled on a ranch style setup. And they had horse riding and archery and canoes and other games and activities. And it was a Christian ministry, so they would share God's love with the children, young people who came. And you would take youth groups down for a weekend, and it was great fun, excitement. They'd learn. But there were also camps that they ran themselves through the week, and there was staff there. And then volunteers would come in and help lead. One of these camps, it had been raining for a few days, and now the sun was out, and they let it settle down. But the river down below the campsite was a beautiful river. Most of it upstream was quite gentle. It flowed gently and was great to take young people out on canoes. And so, having been a bit locked away, they took them out canoeing and said, look, it's really safe up here, no problems. Just here's a point, don't go past this. This point's okay, but if you go much past this, it gets dangerous, because down there is a weir. Now normally the water would just flow gently over the weir and it'd be fine. But after rain, where there's runoff, the weir, there's a lot of water flowing over the weir, and below it was quite turbulent, and the water ran quite quickly when you got close to the weir. So that was fine, they were all paddling up. And Leighton was a staff member. Leighton was a senior staff member, a young bloke in his probably 30s. He was watching on, and there were staff and volunteers in the boats, keeping the young people amused and helping them and whatever. And he's watching, and he noticed this one canoe float further downstream, and yelled out, go back, turn around, go back. For some reason they didn't or couldn't or whatever, and it kept floating down. And maybe the flow got a bit stronger, and they're yelling out, and the others are trying to get down to this canoe. But it was too far ahead, and it kept going and went over the weir. And Leighton was running down the bank of the river and got to the weir, and without a second thought, he just dived into the swirling waters below the weir, where all the water was rushing in and turbulent. He dived in and he pushed the canoe across to the bank where it was safe. But in so doing, he himself was dragged down under the water, and he drowned. Leighton gave his life without a thought. He risked his life and ultimately gave it for the young person in that canoe and saved them. I'm not sure that Jesus is calling us to do that every day of the week. And there are people that do that. But it's to give ourselves for the other. It's not to hide ourselves and protect ourselves with our little tribe. It's not to be afraid of those who look or sound or believe differently and shun them, exclude them, push them aside. It's not to build barriers between those we know, who we're comfortable with, who we like, and those who are different, who have differences. It's actually to build bridges between us. It's to look in the face of someone who's different and love them. There's a story I read the other day. There's two women on a plane. A woman gets on a plane, and there's a couple, and they're separated, and one of them is next to her. So she says, look, do you want my seat? And I'll take yours. So she allowed them to sit together and sat in the seat behind. she hopped over past a guy who was in the aisle. There was a woman against the window, and she had a nose in a magazine. And this was an internal flight in the US, and it stopped at a couple of places before it got to her final destination. So she just opened a book and read, and had some earphones on and read for the first lap. And I stopped at the airport just waiting, and she, her and this woman at the window seat just started talking. And they started talking and talking and talking. And they talked for the rest of the trip. And what started very simply and innocently became a sharing of life. They shared stories of parents and children. And she said, this person, this stranger who I never knew, became a friend in that moment. This person whom I didn't know, I'd never met, and who I might not see again, whom we sort of ignored each other for the first part of the trip, suddenly discovered so much in common and so much of interest. And it made her realise that, you know, the person who walks past me in the street, the person I dismiss over there, the person, maybe a person who could be a really close friend. But also the person over there that I don't know or don't understand. If I took the time to understand and listen, it might change our relationship. Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. Love one another in a way that opens yourself out to the stranger and the friend in your midst. Welcome those who are outcasts and marginalised into the place where we can share a meal together. Love the person who's different. Give a hand up to the person who's struggling. Share life together. Build the bridges of love, not the barriers of hatred or division. And the only way our world will change and become what it can be is through love. This Sunday is Mother's Day. And in the lives of so many mothers are the stories of sacrifice and love. Mothers who give of themselves, of who they are, who sacrifice things of themselves, their time and energy and possibilities for the sake of their children. This is particularly so where children have disabilities or learning problems or psychological problems or medical problems. The gift of motherhood is a model of this sacrificial love of which Jesus speaks. How do we as a nation love beyond ourselves? In a coronavirus pandemic where our nation is doing pretty well, how do we share some resources with places like India? And I know we are, and think of them and embrace them into our world. How do we embrace our Indigenous brothers and sisters and the struggles for identity and sovereignty within the nation that they call theirs? How do we work with refugees and people from other lands who are desperately looking for a new life, a safe place to live? A little family from Sri Lanka that are now languishing in Christmas Island for so long. And how do we love the earth that sustains us, the earth, our mother, that cares for us? And how do we care for it? Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you, giving my whole self for you, that you may have joy, and that joy may be rich and full in you. And because it's rich and full in you, it's full in me. And we'll share that joy and life together. God is love. That was the message I gave to that fellow who asked me, what's this story of Jesus about? God is love. live in love, and you live in God. Amen.